9 personality types that describes patterns of thinking, feeling, and acting. The Enneagram does more than describing behavior, though. It explores not just what we do, but why we do it. It invites us to be aware of what typically shapes and guides us, what typically motivates us, with a view to transformation and freedom in that awareness. Sometimes we are motivated by fear. Sometimes our actions are driven by a feeling of being stifled. Sometimes we are motivated by a deep desire to be successful or to be needed. Sometimes we're motivated by greed or entitlement. These kinds of motivations restrict us, and they keep us from flourishing. The Enneagram invites us to be aware of these restrictions, and in that awareness to free ourselves from them. This week's Gospel passage, often referred to as the parable of the wicked tenants. In this passage, we have a vivid example of behavior with skewed motivation. This parable would have made sense to the audience of Matthew's Gospel. This arrangement of leasing land was normal at that time, and it would have been understood that the tenants would work the land, give a portion of the harvest to the landowner, and keep the rest. This is not what happens, though. The tenants' motivation is misguided. They are motivated, overcome, really, by greed, by entitlement. And that greed and entitlement set them into a downward spiral of anger and violence. And they beat, stone, or kill everyone, including the son and heir. How often does this happen in our world? What's mine is mine perspective and motivation that sets us against each other and that produces anger and violence instead of peace and reconciliation. Motivation that increases division, creating barriers and obstacles instead of unity. My house, my job, my time, my beliefs. Clinging so tightly to what's mine is mine that we act out of fear or greed or entitlement. Fear and greed and entitlement is what Richard Rohr would call oppositional energy. It never knows what it is for. It only knows what it's against. It's a spirit of rejection. Richard Rohr also says this: there are two ways of being a prophet. One is to tell the enslaved that they can be free. It is a difficult path of Moses. The second is to tell those who think they are free that they are enslaved. This is the even more difficult path of Jesus. This parable of the wicked tenants is a reminder not to cling so tightly, not to live with what's mine is mine as our motivation. It reminds us that oppositional energy, a spirit of rejection, isn't life-giving. It enslaves us, and it will actually trip us up. This parable isn't just about the wicked tenants. It's not just about identifying ourselves or highlighting our motivations. It's about God. Jesus asks the Pharisees what they think the vineyard owner would do to the tenants. How would he punish their wicked behavior? The Pharisees expect violence in response to violence. They expect the vineyard owner to put the tenants to death and to start over with people who will produce fruit. But there is no putting to death of the wicked tenants. Instead, Jesus speaks of the cornerstone. Jesus is the cornerstone of God's kingdom. Jesus is evidence that the kingdom way is not a way of entitlement and ownership and greed. The kingdom way, a life built on the cornerstone that is Jesus, is a way of relational energy. It's a way that produces fruit. It's a way that sees growth and flourishing. It's a way that recognizes that this vineyard of creation is not ours to own and hoard and cling to. It's a way that recognizes that there is an incredible harvest, more than we can ask or imagine, that is ours to share. Jesus points to what the wicked tenants are missing by being motivated by greed and entitlement. When we hear the verse, finally he sent his son to them, saying, they will respect my son. We have a heartbreaking reminder of our capacity not to see, of our capacity to be misguided in our motivation, and to spiral into violence and division out of greed, or fear, or entitlement. The wicked tenants are missing an opportunity, and all too often in our world, so are we, missing an opportunity to be free from a life motivated and hindered by oppositional energy, missing an opportunity to receive God's grace and love, and to join in the movement and flow of that grace in the world. What shifts can we make in our motivations? How do we make those shifts? The Enneagram is a useful tool when considering our motivations. Self-awareness makes a big difference on this human journey, especially if we are committed to growth and change, when that self-awareness highlights things that hinder rather than help us. I'm reading Barbara Brown Taylor's Gospel Medicine at the moment. The gospel is medicine for us. The good news of God's way made known in Jesus is the medicine we need to shift our motivations. In that book, she says this about the parable of the wicked tenants. The tenants killed the son too, but he would not stay dead, and to this day he is still haunting the vineyard, reminding us that we are God's guests, welcome on this earth, and welcome to it, so long as we remember whose it is and how it is to be used. Jesus does remind us that we are God's guests in the vineyard of creation. Jesus also reminds us that we are beloved guests. We are loved, even when we have been misguided in our motivation, by a God who wants us to flourish. Last week I said that the question, what kind of God do you believe in, is more important than the question, do you believe in God? We are loved by a God who is with us, waiting for us to open our eyes to misguided motivations and to free ourselves from that motivation by embracing a kingdom way of being in the world. God is waiting for the world to open its eyes. And we are called here on this corner of Somerset and Bell Streets to be an open-eyed and eye-opening community that shows what a kingdom way of being looks like. A kingdom way of being doesn't cling too tightly to what we have. A kingdom way recognizes that the harvest is to be shared. A A kingdom way sees us support one another, especially the vulnerable, with care and compassion. A kingdom way makes space to know ourselves, including our misguided motivations, and in being aware of those misguided motivations, to free ourselves and others to know God's love and grace. May we be a kingdom way community today, tomorrow,